Hello and welcome to today's interview for Beep. My name is James and today I'm speaking to a young journalist called Kit Roberts. Kit, how are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, thank you for joining me. Right, so let's begin with a little bit about yourself. So you're an NCTJ Gold Standard journalist and you speak 6 languages?
4.
Oh, okay.
Some better than others, but yeah.
Okay, so what languages are they? First of all?
So obviously English is my mother tongue. I would say I'm proficient in Italian. I started learning that about 3 years ago. I'm intermediate in Portuguese, which I started about 15 months ago. And I'm kind of like lower intermediate, I would say, in modern standard Arabic and Levantine Arabic, which is
Wow.
very much like a project for a lifetime, really.
No, those are very useful languages to learn. So can you tell us a bit about how you got to where you are today and what inspired you to become a journalist, first of all?
Sure. So I was temping a few years ago and I came across someone who was studying at this place called News Associates in Manchester to become a journalist. At the time, I was wanting to go into academia, but I just kind of didn't really register it that much. This place, I sort of knew it existed. Unfortunately, it didn't work out with academia, and I just had this kind of light bulb moment, really, of like, well, of course, journalism is what I should be doing. I should be like out there getting engaged with what is going on. Like, it's always something that's really interested me. I've always valued being kind of up to date with stuff and knowing what's happening and what's going on. And there was just this kind of moment where it clicked. It's like, of course, that was absolutely perfect. That's what I should be doing. It's what I'm good at, I think. So yeah, I got in touch with the School of Journalism and just went from there, really.
Excellent. And how long have you been doing this stuff for now?
So I started training, I think it would be last September. Obviously, we've had a few complications
Sorry,
with...
you mean last September 2019 or 2020?
That'll be 2019.
Okay. So
Yeah, September 2019, yeah, was when the course actually officially started. But obviously things got quite complicated. They got a bit drawn out because of COVID. And my course, I think, finished a couple of months ago. So now I'm basically just freelancing, trying to pick up as much work as I can, trying to get a staff job, basically.
Excellent. And obviously you write for The Independent. Is there anywhere else that you we will find your words?
Yeah, so I've written a few things for Independent. I've written a few things for Redaction Politics. I've also been published in the Manchester Evening News and Mancunian Matters as well.
Excellent.
It's just trying to get as big a platform as possible, really.
And obviously in the description to this, we'll post your the link that you have on your Twitter account. So I think Muckrack is the name of the website.
Muckrack, my Muckrack page, yeah.
Okay, we'll post that along. Now, obviously, this interview is based on your latest article for The Independent, which was about Englishness, and we'll post that link as well. So, what is your interpretation of Englishness, and how might that differ from Nigel Farage's or Stephen Yaxley-Lennon's?
Okay, so for me, I think Englishness is very much more about, as with any kind of national identity, to me, it's more about what it would mean to you as an individual, right? To anyone, any individual person, because different people, regardless of where you're born in England, if you're born in England, you are English, regardless of what cultural background, what religious background, anything like that. You are technically English. You're in the nation of England. I think a lot of what is interesting and what is important about that identity is that it's constructed through people's lived experiences. It's something that constantly changes. It's something that is different depending on where you are in the country. I think what is different about that idea, about that very kind of broad, very varied and subjective approach to what it means to be English, is different because people like Nigel Farage, they're very, very good at tapping into this very warm, fuzzy, patriotic idea of what it means to be English, this very sort of confected and idealized version of it, which politically is, I think, very easy to use. It's very easy to kind of tap into those kind of feelings, because people like that. People like the idea of belonging. They like the idea of being a part of something greater than themselves, right? Even though I think that the idea of nationality and Englishness in particular is something which is more nuanced, which is more about your own experiences. So I think that is probably like the main difference. You have this very confected, this very idealized idea of our own history, of our identity, compared to a far more complex, a far more critical idea of what it is to be English and belong to the nation of England.
Okay, that's interesting. You mentioned lived experiences, which I think is interesting. So what sort of lived experiences would you be talking about that might help someone feel English, or help someone not, or do the exact opposite, for example?
Well, I think what I mean when I say that, so I mentioned this in the article, is that England contains so many different people from different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. And Englishness is a common factor for all those people, right? But each of them is bringing something completely different to that identity, to that idea. So like I say in the article, like an English Afro-Caribbean who's living in Peckham, their idea of Englishness is going to be very different from a white woman who lives in Bolton or a British Pakistani who lives in Walsall, right? But all of them are English. They all kind of share this same identity, but they're going to be bringing very different ideas of what it means to be English to that, right? But they're all just as valid. They're all wonderful. They're all a part of it. That is what I mean when I say something that's more personal and more varied, rather than something that's very kind of singular in its idea of what Englishness is. You know, it's rule Britannia, it's like cucumber sandwiches and drinking tea in the Empire, right? It's one idea of what it means to be English. Whereas actually, I think it's far more complicated, it's far more nuanced, it's far more individualistic than that.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly interesting. In your article, one quote in your article that I found really interesting was you talk about Carl Benjamin, the YouTuber, and how he has basically, in your eyes, used the work of John Milton to, what your exact words were, to use it as an argument for freedom to offend without impunity. So what sort of impunity should be expected for someone that says something offensive, for example?
Well, I don't think there should be any impunity for it. I think he was misquoting. So the piece that by Milton that he was quoting in that is Milton's Areopagitica, which is one of the very first essays or speeches that was written in defense of freedom of the press. It's an iconic piece. He misinterprets it by saying that actually you should be allowed to say what you want without any consequence. Whereas what the whole point of that piece is that it's arguing that there should be a critical and like robust debate. If you say something and someone disagrees with it, you should be prepared to take the consequences of someone disagreeing with you or finding what you're saying abhorrent, right, or offensive. You have the freedom to say that if you want to. That's the whole point. But the idea is you should expect criticism, you should expect feedback, you should expect a robust debate. And if your ideas are worthy, if they stand up to it, then they can move forward. If they don't, then they don't. But the point is that they've been tested in that free and open debate. Whereas what he was using it to argue was more that he should just be allowed to say whatever he wants without consequence. And if someone else takes issue with that, then that is impinging on his freedom of speech. That's nonsense, right? You can't just go around saying whatever you want without expecting people to take offense or people to take issue with it, right? That's just it's part of the parcel when you want a free and robust debate, right? So I think what was particularly painful for me with that as well is that John Milton's work is something which means a great deal to me. I spent a lot of time with John Milton at university. I studied him a lot. He's one of my favorite poets and writers in English. He has a lot of problems, a lot of very big problems, but I still think that in his own time, he's a visionary. He's like a really important writer. So for me to see someone kind of co-opting his work and using it to push forward their own ideas, misinterpreting his work and pushing forward their own ideas with it, it's quite painful. And I think you can see it's very easy to kind of write it off and say, well, look, I'm ashamed to be English. I don't want to be a part of this. When actually, when you see something like that happening, something that's important to you being co-opted in that way, you need to reclaim it. You need to say, actually, this is not what is meant by this. This is not what this part of English history and English culture is. This is what it actually is. I can say that as someone who's spent a lot of time with this, who studied this, right? You can see the similar kind of thing in a more general sense with people like Farage, right, who is co-opting this idea of English history and saying, well, this is what it means to be English. This is what this particular part of English history means and English culture means. And if you have any other interpretation of that, you're wrong, you're a liberal, you're a leftist, you're, you know, part of the woke brigade, whatever, right? That's not how it works. You can't allow someone to do that. No one has a monopoly on history, right?
Yeah.
I think it's so important to actually just have these debates, have these arguments. There's a lot that is wrong and that is very, very problematic with English history. We cannot like whitewash that. We can't push that down. You have to acknowledge that. But at the same time, you have to look at what you're proud of as well. There is a lot in English history to be proud of. It shouldn't be anathema to say that. The only way that you actually move forward, that you begin this healing process that is just so long overdue, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very tough to put that forward, but it needs to happen, is to examine all of English history, to say what is good, what is bad, how we can move forward and actually make positive change now as well, right? You can't just allow people to co-opt it for a particular political ideology and push it and say, this is what it means to be English. If you disagree with this, then you're unpatriotic. That's nonsense. Someone who is truly patriotic should like criticize, give constructive criticism to their country, right? That's how you improve it. If you want what's best for the country and what's best for the people that live there, you should criticize it, right? You should give it constructive criticism so that it can build and improve and like make life better for the people that live there. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at when I found, and John Benjamin's like use of the Arabic Ithaca of John Milton. It's one example that was, I think, personally important to me of this much larger problem, which is people misinterpreting English history, misinterpreting English culture, and co-opting it for their own like political motivations and their own ideological motivations. And to me, that is a big problem. It was particularly painful to me because it's, you know, an author that's important to me, but it is a much wider problem as well.
Okay. One thing I want to pick you up on there is you talk about consequences of saying something, but surely, and I see a lot of people nowadays on Twitter. I think Labour MP Carl Turner talked about freedom of speech, but not freedom of the consequences after Darren Grimes, the journalist, was interviewed by the Met Police regarding that interview with David Starkey, which I'm sure you'll remember. And one thing I don't get about this might be my ignorance, but surely freedom of speech isn't freedom if there are consequences to what someone says.
I think that's what the likes are. It's a good question, and I think it's actually central. It's a really important question as well, because I think a lot of the debate is kind of centered around this idea that you should be allowed to say what you like without consequence. But actually, this is what I talk about when I sort of say that Benjamin falls very much under like the license. License is like to do whatever you want without consequence, right? Whereas freedom, as like it's defined in this particular essay, is more about actually creating an environment where like the best outcome can like come out of a debate, right? You can't just, if you say something and there are consequences and people disagree, that's different than someone saying, like, trying to silence you, right? If you come out into a public forum, you say an idea and people reject it, that's not the same as you coming out into a forum and being suppressed and punished for saying what you want to say, right? That's a very different thing. So I think people like crying wolf and saying, I'm being silenced, whilst also shouting out from a very large platform, you know, Grimes has a very large platform, right? Is a complete contradiction. They are contributing to the debate and people are taking issue with it. And then they are shouting back that because people have taken issue with that they're being silenced. They're not being silenced, they're being criticized. That's different. It's a really important part of any kind of any robust like democratic society is that you have to have this like diversity of opinion, right? People have to be free to argue and disagree with each other. But if you have a problem with people disagreeing with you, then you are not contributing to that culture, that kind of productive, beneficial debate, basically. I think that's the difference. The difference between it's a difference between having a problem with someone disagreeing with you and actually being like silenced and suppressed. There is a difference.
Okay, just quickly before we move on, you mentioned the word license. So maybe what I was slightly ignorant of is the difference between freedom and license to do stuff. And so your interpretation would be that you have freedom of speech rather than license to say anything, and that's the difference.
That's the difference, yeah. Freedom of speech is being able to put forward an opinion into a public forum without fear for without fear for yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Without fear for your personal safety, or anything like that.
Or if something like suppression and being silenced.
Exactly, yeah. If someone then comes out after you've put that opinion into that forum, like Twitter is a forum, right, and takes issue with it, that's fine, as long as they're not threatening you or personally attacking you, like physically threatening you or anything like that, and they're just attacking your opinions, not you. That's fine. That's that should be part of like a healthy debate, or it should be in theory. Twitter's probably not the best example for that, but yeah, that's the difference. If I were to come out with an opinion and say, I think that equal marriage is an essential component of any like just society, and then someone was to come and beat me up in the street for saying that, that is suppression. If someone was to go into a public forum and explain why they think that's wrong, that's different. That's just them disagreeing with me. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So obviously Englishness and patriotism have been very prevalent in discourse this year, especially during the proms with the BBC and Rule Britannia, and you actually mentioned that earlier on. So what did you make of that whole event? It's a bit old now, but it was very interesting nonetheless.
I mean, I think this comes back to having this one idea of what Englishness means, right? Rule Britannia it's a song that's almost 300 years old, right? It's based on a poem that was written in the 1740s to celebrate the Royal Navy being good at, being a navy, basically, which, fine, in context, that's okay. If we look at it now, there's a lot in that which is very kind of jingoistic and very like celebrating a lot of the things that maybe now we want to re-examine in English history, right? Some of the, talking about the imperialism, we're talking about the like Industrial Revolution, stuff that is now being re-examined very closely. I think it's very healthy to look at why we want to sing that at the end of the proms. Personally, I think it's probably time to choose something else, because this is a very outdated and singular idea of what it means to be English. And I think, like I said, part of actually celebrating Englishness and English history and English culture is examining it and saying what is wrong with it and how we can change it. Identity changes over time, right? What it means to be English now is very different from what it meant to be English 300 years ago when that song was written, right? So for me, even if you leave aside all of the very kind of problematic stuff that is in that song, which, it's really not great if you read the lyrics, it's just not a song that I think represents what Englishness is now, which again is this very diverse, this very varied thing, this very varied identity. It's not just one thing. We are not the England that we were 300 years ago, nearly 300 years ago, when we were just kind of on the cusp of this big like imperial expansion. That's not something that I think should be celebrated uncritically now. It should be looked at, it should be re-examined. I think like one of the people that I think is leading this debate and is actually really creating a great idea as to like what history means and what is historian David Olagusa. He's done a lot of like BBC documentaries, like re-examining empire and, where we get a lot of our cultural like artifacts from, where we've stolen them from, basically. But he's written a lot actually about how healthy it is to re-examine history. It's not whitewashing history. It's not destroying history. A lot of conservative commentators claim that, you know, if you want to re-examine empire, if you want to re-examine the UK, England's role in the slave trade, for example, that is unpatriotic. That is whitewashing history. It's changing history. It's not. History changes. Our interpretation of history changes over time. It's healthy and it's positive to re-examine these issues. Okay, we've moved on. We've developed as a country. Okay, we've developed as a nation. We can't. These things are huge. They're like such problems, such atrocities that we've committed in the past. We can't make up for them now, but we can like begin a healing process, I think, is what's important. And part of that is re-examining it, like, which is what like Oliver argues like, a lot. It's healthy. It's what you should be doing, is re-examining your history, re-examining what it means, and criticizing it. It all just comes back to this idea that you should, if you say something and someone takes issue with it, that is a part of the process. That's not a bad thing. That's part of the process. So yeah, I think with the Rule Britannia saga, sorry, it's.
We'll take that bit out in the edit. Don't worry.
Yeah. It's a very kind of it's a part of that really kind of healthy process to examine why it is that we still have this, and actually why people are so defensive of it as well. That is also the thing, because people get really riled up about the fact that someone wants to get rid of that song and replace it, like accusing it of censorship and all that kind of stuff. It's not censorship. It's just re-examining what we're looking at and what it means to be English, and that's fine. That's healthy. We should be doing that. To me personally, I don't think that song is representative of what it means to be English in the 21st century. But a lot of people disagree with me on that.
No, people are obviously very free to disagree. You mentioned the word outdated. You know, you might say that it's outdated, given it's 300 years old. Others would use the word traditional. And a lot of people, actually probably myself included, would look at the lyrics, or not necessarily look at the lyrics, but realize that it's not necessarily about, it's no longer about, say, the British Empire and slavery, but it's more about it's just about patriotism nowadays. That's what people associate the song with nowadays.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are other songs that are patriotic that don't have that problem. You know, you look at something like, or have that less of that problem, right? You can look at a song like, I don't know, Land of Hope and Glory, or Jerusalem, right? Both like traditional English songs.
Jerusalem is factually inaccurate because it said that Jesus walked on English soils. So perhaps not that one, but Land of Hope. I mean,
you know, there are certain churches that claim he was also in America as well. So
yes,
I think
that is true.
But like you say, if it comes back to just this sense of patriotism, then there are other songs that can illustrate that without that kind of celebration of imperialism, that celebration of, you know, English expansion into the world, right? And again, like I say, patriotism is not this one. It shouldn't be centered around this one idea. You know, one of the qualities that a lot of like people internationally say that the English have, at least until 2016, is pragmatism and practicality, right? And I think it is extremely pragmatic, it's extremely rational, it's extremely practical to re-examine what it means, what our traditions mean, and what they continue to mean in the future, right? That's part of our tradition. You know, we're supposedly pragmatic people, but I think getting tied up in one idea of what it means to be English, one idea of what it means to be patriotic, does not reflect that at all. It's not a good idea. So I mean, you say it's a patriotic song, sure, it's more about patriotism, but there are other ways to express patriotism. You don't have to be like standing up singing Rule Britannia and all that kind of stuff to express your pride in being English.
Okay, no, brilliant. And I should mention that you mentioned Land of Hope and Glory. There was also quite a bit of furore behind that song as well. I think they wanted the same people that wanted Rule Britannia gone also wanted Land of Hope and Glory gone. I feel like I should just mention that.
Sure. Well, I mean, again, like this is part of like that trying to create consensus, right? It's not just like people are going to take issue with songs. That's fine. But I think the way that this is all part of that like debate that I said, this free and open space. If people want to take issue with them, they entirely they're like in their right. If other people don't have issue with them, that is also fine. It's part of the debate, right?
No, I don't think you can really disagree with that sentence. Finally, so last question, very quickly. In one sentence, what do you think should be done to make English as inclusive as possible?
I think people need to examine and criticize what it means to be English for themselves personally, and to kind of set that next to this like patriotic idea of Englishness that we've been presented. It's important to, I think, examine yourself and examine where you come from and how that affects your interpretation of what it is, your own idea of Englishness, your own personal idea. It's more than one sentence, but I think that's the most that's the most important thing for me. It's about what people need to examine themselves and how their own perspective and their own experiences inform what it means to be English for them. And don't be afraid to be critical either. That's important.
Okay, brilliant. Kit, thank you very much for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for watching. I've been James, and this has been Beep. And I'm going to stop recording now.